Why don't you cover up that disgusting scar? Nobody wants to look at that mangled meat while they're eating. My younger brother Ethan's voice cut sharply across the patio. My older sister Linda took a sip of her red wine and sneered through her teeth. She just loves the attention. Always has. This arm was scorched in a bomb blast in Afghanistan. I used this bleeding hand to pry open a Humvee door and drag two of my guys out. But to my own blood, the same people who burned through every dime of my hazard pay to cover their medical debts. This scar was just a piece of trash ruining their upscale suburban barbecue. I was about to get up and leave when my brother-in-law, a former Navy SEAL commander, suddenly stood up and dropped a name that drained the arrogance right out of my sister's pale face. Before I go on, take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if you really want to hear how this ends. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The silence that followed Ethan's words wasn't empty. It was heavy, thick with the stench of charred beef fat dripping onto the hot coals of the Weber grill. A drop of sweat rolled down my neck, not from the afternoon sun, but from the sheer physical effort it took to keep my hands flat on my lap. I looked at Ethan, 35 years old, wearing a designer polo shirt that cost more than my first set of body armor. His lips were curled up at the edges, a dirty, satisfied little smirk. He leaned back the wooden legs of his chair, scraping harshly against the expensive polished stone of the patio. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought he was putting his damaged military sister back in her box. Tearing down my career was just his favorite way to make his empty corporate life feel a little bit bigger. Linda didn't miss a beat. 41 and drowning in suburban narcissism, she swirled the dark red wine in her oversized glass. She wore her fake perfection like a shield, using the brand name clothes and the polished nails to hide the absolute hollow void inside her chest. To them, my service wasn't a sacrifice. It was an inconvenience, a grotesque reminder of a reality they preferred to ignore. They had zero problem taking the money, though. When the medical bills piled up, they happily drained every last dime of my combat hazard pay. But looking at the physical cost of that money, that was just ruining their appetite. I didn't snap. I didn't curse them out. I could feel the pulse hammering in my neck. The urge to flip the table to grab Ethan by his expensive collar and show him what actual survival looked like was a dull ache in my knuckles. But you don't survive a war zone by firing blindly. You assess. You calculate. I let my eyes drift away from their pathetic, gloating faces. I mapped the perimeter of the backyard, 12 feet to the side gate, unlatched. A straight shot to my truck parked on the curb. If I opened my mouth to argue with these shallow parasites, I'd be stripping myself of my own rank. I clamped down hard on the raw nerve they'd just struck. Total tactical lockdown. The quiet dragged on. A neighbor's lawnmower hummed a few houses down. Then the sound of a heavy stainless steel fork hitting a ceramic plate. Clack! Raymond pushed his chair back. The metal frame groaned in protest. He didn't just stand up. He rose like a tidal wave. Raymond was 45, a retired Navy SEAL commander. An O5 who had actually seen the devil in the dark. He carried a heavy, lethal gravity that manicured lawns and HOA meetings could never beat out of him. He was the only person in this family who actually understood the language of war. He completely ignored Linda, ignored the sudden panic flashing in his wife's eyes as she realized the atmosphere had just violently shifted. Raymond's stare bypassed her entirely. His eyes locked dead onto my bare arm, onto the jagged, mangled flesh where the shrapnel had chewed through muscle and bone. "Operation Iron Storm," Raymond said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a low, gravelly rumble that hit like a physical blow across the table. Black Eagle. The patio went dead silent. Ethan's smirk vanished, wiped clean off his face. Linda's jaw dropped. They didn't know the classified operations. They didn't know my call sign. But they understood the terrifying absolute authority radiating from the man standing at the head of the table. Linda scrambled. She tried to patch the cracking facade. "Ray, honey, come on. We're just saying she could be a little more. Shut your mouth, Linda." Raymond cut her down with 4 words. He finally turned his head, his eyes boring into his wife. She earned that scar 1,000 times over. Anyone at this table who talks trash about it doesn't know the first damn thing about honor. The execution was flawless. Linda's fake tan suddenly looked sickly, the blood draining from her cheeks. Her hand shook violently. A heavy splash of expensive Cabernet sloshed over the rim of her glass, staining her pristine white designer dress. It looked like a gunshot wound. Beside her, Ethan visibly shrank. He hunched his shoulders, pulling his neck down like a scared kid. You could hear the audible gulp as he swallowed a lump of pure fear. The corporate hotshot reduced to a shivering coward in his own backyard. Raymond turned his body fully toward me. He didn't offer a hollow suburban apology. He gave me the only thing that mattered. He snapped his heels together, a sharp, deliberate crack of leather. He threw a rigid, perfect salute. I didn't gloat. I didn't take the cheap shot and rub it in my siblings' faces. The war here was already over. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and gave Raymond a slow, silent nod of acknowledgement. I picked up my keys. I walked across the stone path, pushed open the cedar gate, and walked away. I left them sitting in the smoking ruins of their own fake empire. The heavy steel door of my truck slammed shut, sealing out the neighborhood. I shoved the key into the ignition, put it in drive. As I pulled away from the curb, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. But I wasn't checking for traffic. I was looking at my arm resting on the steering wheel, the thick, uneven ridges of the scar. The city traffic honked around me, but the noise started to warp, stretch, muffle. The suburban horns died out, completely swallowed by a different sound. The deafening, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of a Black Hawk chopper tearing through a dusty Afghan sky. The thwack, thwack, thwack of the chopper blades didn't just rattle in my ears, it rattled in my teeth. Suddenly, the suburban street outside my windshield dissolved. The air conditioning blowing against my face turned into a blast furnace. 120 degrees in the Afghan dirt. Smell of stale sweat, diesel fuel, and fear. Then the white flash. No sound at first. Just a wall of solid pressure slamming into the side of the Humvee. The IED ripped the armor plating apart like cheap tin foil. The vehicle flipped. Dirt glass and burning metal filled the cabin. My vision narrowed down to a dark tunnel. My ears screamed with a high-pitched ringing. I looked down at my left arm. The sleeve of my uniform was gone. Slashed open, jagged white bone poked through a mess of ruined smoking muscle. Blood poured over the tactical console. It smelled like copper and burning rubber. I didn't feel the pain. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. In the back seat, two 19-year-old kids were screaming. The doors were crushed inward. Smoke was pouring through the floorboards. The fuel line was ruptured. I reached over with my shattered left arm, ignoring the grating slide of bone on bone. I gripped the bent door latch with a hand that was barely attached. I braced my boots against the dashboard. I pulled. Tendons snapped. Muscle tore further. I tasted blood in the back of my throat. The latch snapped open. I kicked the door out and dragged those two kids into the dirt by their tactical vests just as the fuel tank cooked off behind us. 3 hours later. A forward operating base med tent. The air was thick with the stench of iodine and old blood. Clink, clink. The sound of bloody twisted shrapnel dropping into a stainless steel surgical tray. The combat surgeon held a syringe of liquid heaven. Major, I need to push this morphine. You are sliced to ribbons. I locked my jaw. Negative, doc. Tape it up. I need a clear head to file the after-action report. He stared at me, shaking his head. He looked down at the mangled meat of my forearm. Shrapnel dug in deep. Looks like a bird of prey got hold of you. A black eagle. The call sign stuck. I didn't call home that night. I sat on a cot, bleeding through the gauze, staring at the satellite phone. I knew exactly what would happen if I called Linda. She wouldn't ask if I was alive. She would let out that long theatrical sigh and say, "Molly, do you have to do this right now? I am in the middle of a dinner party." So I kept the silence. I always did. Just like I did 5 years ago. I was sitting in a concrete bunker, the smell of damp sand and cheap instant coffee hanging in the air. A crackling satellite line connected me to the States. Dad needed a quadruple bypass. His insurance was garbage, 50 grand out of pocket or they wouldn't schedule the surgery. I had asked Linda to help. Just a temporary loan. Her voice over the static was dripping with suburban annoyance. I cannot put a lien on the Porsche Molly. Are you insane? Ray's business partners are coming over this weekend. What will it look like if we have bank people snooping around? You figure it out. You're the single one with no real expenses. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I hung up. I pulled out a secure laptop and contacted an anonymous trust lawyer in DC. I signed over every single dime of my combat hazard pay. The money I earned by getting shot at, by bleeding in the sand, by watching good men die. I dumped the entire $50,000 into a blind account to pay the hospital. No names, no recognition, just cash. Dad survived. 3 weeks later, I got a 72-hour stateside pass. I stood in the corner of his recovery room at the local hospital. The room smelled like bleach and cheap flowers. Linda was holding court at the foot of his bed. She wore a pristine beige cashmere sweater, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. Aunts and uncles were gathered around, hanging on her every word. I just prayed and prayed, Linda choked out, pressing a hand to her chest. I spent days calling everyone I knew. Finally, this amazing private charity stepped in. They covered everything. It was a miracle. I just couldn't let our dad die. I had to fight for him. An aunt patted Linda's shoulder. You are such an angel, Linda. He is so lucky to have a daughter who fought so hard. I stood by the door in my Class A uniform. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of my coat. My index finger was tracing the sharp, cold edge of a folded piece of paper. The wire transfer receipt from the DC lawyer. $50,000. Blood money. I looked at Linda. She met my eyes for a fraction of a second. There was a flicker of guilt quickly swallowed by cold defiance. She knew I wouldn't say anything. Correcting her meant starting a screaming match in an intensive care unit. It meant dragging Dad's pride through the mud. I chose the discipline. I left my hand in my pocket. I let her steal the glory built on my broken bones. If you have ever been the one paying the heavy price while someone else took all the credit, you know exactly how suffocating that silence feels. Drop a yes in the comments. If you've ever been the invisible backbone of your family, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I finally collected on that debt. The memory faded. The sharp edge of the receipt morphed into the hard plastic of the steering wheel under my grip. I was back in the truck. The engine was idling. Then the silence in the cab broke. Bzzzt. My phone lit up on the dashboard. The screen glowed harshly in the dim cab. A text message. From Ethan. The truck cab smelled like stale black coffee and hot vinyl. The afternoon sun baked the windshield, throwing a blinding glare across the dashboard. Bzzzt. The cheap plastic casing of my phone rattled against the dash mat. I did not check it while driving. I kept my eyes on the road, watching a rusted-out Ford swerve into the next lane. I eased my foot onto the brake and pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of Highway 9. The heavy tires crunched over broken glass and dried weeds. I threw the shifter into park. The transmission clunked heavy and solid. I picked up the phone. The glass screen was hot against my palm. One new message. Sender Ethan. I tapped the notification. I did not expect a genuine apology. A guy who cowers in his own backyard while his brother-in-law dresses him down does not have the spine for real accountability. The text popped up on the bright screen. Hey, sorry if yesterday got a little intense. You know how Linda is. She just talks without thinking. We're still family. Don't make a big deal out of it. I read the words twice. The audacity of it left a sour metallic taste in my mouth. A little intense. He equated my shredded arm, the physical proof of my survival, to a bad game of golf. He reduced the sacrifice that kept our father breathing to a minor social inconvenience. There was no ownership in those words, no accountability, just a pathetic attempt to sweep the ugliness under the rug so he would not have to look at his own reflection anymore. And just like a classic coward, he shoved all the blame onto his sister. He threw Linda right under the bus to save his own skin. He did not regret what they did. He only regretted that Raymond had publicly humiliated him for it. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. The impulse to fire back was there, a reflex. I could type out exactly what I thought of his expensive polo shirts and his hollow parasitic life. I could remind him exactly whose hazard pay covered the mortgage on their fake reality. I did not type a single letter. My hands were completely steady. The steering wheel leather was rough under my knuckles. In a combat zone, when the enemy throws a smoke grenade into your trench, you do not stand up and scream at the smoke. You do not negotiate with a sniper who takes potshots from the dark. You lock down. You seal the bunker. Engaging with a manipulator is just handing them the ammunition they need to shoot you again. They want the reaction. They feed on the drama. I was done feeding them. I backed out of the message thread. I tapped the icon next to his name. The contact card opened. There was a time when I would have tried to fix this, when I would have swallowed the disrespect just to keep the peace at the holiday dinner table. But that peace was a lie. It was a hostage situation. I was the one paying the ransom every single time, bleeding myself dry to keep them comfortable. I scrolled to the bottom of the screen. The text was stark red. Block this caller. I stared at those 3 words. My thumb hovered a fraction of an inch above the glass. 5 years of biting my tongue. 5 years of taking the hits and sitting quietly in the corner while they paraded around pretending they built their lives all by themselves. I did not feel a sudden rush of empowerment. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling into my bones. I pressed the red text. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. I hit confirm. The screen went back to the main menu. Just like that, Ethan was gone. Erased. His numbers, his texts, his cowardly excuses all blocked by a digital wall. Wiped completely off the grid. I pressed the side button. The screen went black with a cold, sharp click. I sat there in the sweltering cab of the truck. The engine idled, a low, steady rumble you could feel in your teeth. A semi-truck roared past on the highway, shaking my cab, blasting grit and dust against the driver's side door. Cutting off your own blood does not feel like a victory. It does not bring joy or relief. It just leaves a massive freezing void right in the center of your chest. A dead space where a brother used to be. You mourn the family you were supposed to have while staring at the monsters you actually got. But that was the cost of a steel boundary. You had to endure the cold to keep the poison out. I would rather sit in an empty room than a room full of loaded guns pointed at my back. I reached for the gear shift. I needed to get back on the road. I needed to put miles between me and that manicured, suffocating suburb. Before my hand touched the cracked leather knob, the phone erupted again. Not a buzz. A loud, sharp ringtone that cut through the heavy heat of the cab. I looked down at the black screen. A name flashed in bright white letters against the dark background. Raymond Moore. He did not send a text. He did not hide behind a screen and type out a carefully crafted excuse. He was calling direct. Face to face, voice to voice. That was the difference between a corporate rat and a field commander. I picked up the phone. I slid my thumb across the glass to answer. I brought the receiver to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not soften my tone. Major Grant. Raymond's voice came through the speaker. It was bone dry. No small talk. No fake warmth. Just the heavy, rough gravel of a man who knew exactly what kind of wreckage he had just walked away from. Commander, I said. I owe you a decent conversation, Raymond said. The audio crackled slightly, picking up the sound of wind on his end. He was already driving too. Blackwood Coffee Shop on 4th Street, 30 minutes. He did not ask if I was busy. He did not ask if I was okay or if I needed time to process the ambush at the barbecue. He issued a coordinate. He understood the rules of engagement. Copy that, I said. The line went dead. Blackwood Coffee Shop sat on the dead end of 4th Street. It wasn't a place with oat milk lattes, reclaimed wood, or ambient playlists. It smelled like industrial bleach, burnt coffee beans, and old grease. An oversized ceiling fan ticked overhead. Clack, clack, clack. The sound marked time like a metronome in a bomb casing. I pushed through the heavy glass door. Raymond was already there. Corner booth, faded red vinyl. He wore a plain black t-shirt and a dark canvas jacket. The suburban husband from the backyard barbecue was gone. This was the 05, the SEAL commander. He sat rigidly, his thick forearms resting on the scratched formica table. A chipped ceramic mug sat in front of him. Black coffee. No cream, no sugar. untouched. I slid into the booth across from him. The vinyl groaned. I kept my back straight, my hands flat on my thighs. We didn't talk about the weather. We didn't exchange pleasantries. Men and women who have carried body bags don't waste time on throat clearing. Raymond stared at his mug. The steam was already gone. I stood there for 5 years, Molly, Raymond said. His voice was thick, like gravel grinding under a heavy boot. I sat at the head of that table year after year, and I listened to Linda take her shots at you. I didn't blink. I didn't reach across the table to pat his hand. I waited. I told myself it was just family friction. He continued, his jaw tightening. I told myself that if I stepped in, it would just make the marriage harder, make the holidays harder. I traded your dignity for a quiet house. I looked at him. The fan ticked above us. In the military, there is no gray area for looking the other way. If a squad leader watches a private get beaten down in the barracks and does nothing, that leader goes down with the attackers. Silent complicity is a court-martial offense. Raymond knew that. He was a commander. He knew he had violated the core code of the uniform. He let a civilian play target practice with a soldier just so he wouldn't have to argue with his wife. "And then I saw your arm today," Raymond said. He finally looked up. His eyes locked onto mine. I saw that scar. And I heard Ethan open his garbage mouth. It hit me all at once. I haven't been keeping the peace, Molly. I've been an accomplice to a coward. I reached for my own cup, brought over by a waitress who didn't say a word. I took a sip. It was bitter, tasted like ash. "An accomplice is still guilty, Commander," I said quietly. Raymond didn't flinch. I know. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg me to understand his position. He just sat there and took the judgment. That was the only reason I was still sitting across from him. Accountability. Raymond reached inside his dark jacket. He pulled his hand out and placed his closed fist over the center of the table. He opened his fingers. Thud. A heavy piece of metal hit the scratched wood. He slid it across the table toward me. It was a coin. Thick, heavy brass, deeply tarnished around the edges. In the center, worn smooth from years of being rubbed by a thumb, was the Navy SEAL trident. An eagle clutching a flintlock pistol, an anchor, and a trident. A challenge coin. But not a generic unit coin handed out by a desk jockey. This was a blood coin. "Fallujah," Raymond said softly. The gravel in his voice cracked just a fraction. "A kid named Miller. He was 22, took a round to the neck while dragging me behind cover. He died in the dirt holding that coin." I stared at the dull brass. "I've carried it every day since," Raymond said. He pulled his hand back, leaving the coin resting an inch from my fingers. Miller didn't care about what neighborhood people came from or what car they drove. He cared about the person in the mud next to him. He'd want someone like you holding on to this, not a guy who let his wife tear down a hero in his own backyard. The ceiling fan ticked. Clack, clack, clack. I reached out. My fingers closed over the brass. It was heavy, cold. It carried the weight of a dead man's sacrifice and a living man's regret. To a civilian, it was a $2 piece of stamped metal. To anyone who had worn boots in the sand, it was the highest honor a soldier could bestow. I didn't say, "Thank you." The words were too small. I picked up the coin. I unbuttoned the left breast pocket of my uniform, shirt the pocket directly over my heart. I slid the cold brass inside and buttoned it shut. I gave Raymond a single sharp nod. I stood up, turned on my heel, and walked out the glass door. The heat of the parking lot hit me like a physical wall. The asphalt radiated waves of distortion. I walked toward my truck, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. As I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a call. A notification. I pulled it out. The screen glared in the sun. An email. Sender Linda. I opened it. "You can't just block Ethan. It is incredibly immature. You embarrassed everyone today. I need to see you right now. Come to the house. No apology, no remorse. Just the blind, staggering entitlement of a woman who thought the world existed to serve her schedule." She was trying to drag me back onto her turf, back to the leather sofas and the poured wine where she held the power. I didn't block her. You don't block the enemy commander when they try to negotiate a surrender. You just dictate the battlefield. I typed out a reply. Fast, clinical. Room 3, County Community Center. 3 p.m. tomorrow. I hit send. Tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Shut the heavy steel door. Room 3 of the County Community Center smelled like industrial floor wax and stale air. The walls were painted a blinding, sterile white. The overhead fluorescent tube had a bad ballast. It buzzed, a low, constant, irritating electrical hum. The table was cheap, molded plastic. It was cold to the touch. There was no mahogany wood. There were no crystal wine glasses. There was no expensive patio furniture to prop up an illusion of wealth. This was a concrete bunker, neutral territory. I sat at the head of the table. My spine was perfectly straight against the hard plastic chair. My hands were folded together, resting on the table. I watched the door. At exactly 3 o'clock, the heavy metal door swung open. Linda walked in first. Ethan followed, dragging his feet like a scolded teenager. They looked entirely out of place. Linda wore a designer silk blouse and a gold watch that caught the harsh overhead light. But without her custom kitchen and her country club friends to back her up, she just looked small. The arrogance from the barbecue was cracking. They sat down across from me. The plastic chairs scraped loudly against the concrete floor. The sound was deafening in the small room. Linda did not waste time. She reached into her expensive leather purse and pulled out a tissue. The waterworks started before she even opened her mouth. She pressed the tissue to her eyes, her shoulders shaking violently. "I do not understand why you are doing this, Molly," Linda sobbed. Her voice was thick, playing the perfect wounded victim. "Dragging us to this awful place. I just want what is best for you. I worry about you. You are always so guarded, so hard. You push everyone away. I just worry that if you keep acting like a man, no man is ever going to want to marry you. I am just trying to help you soften up." I stared at her. I did not blink. I did not reach across the table to offer comfort. I did not pull a tissue from the box. I kept my hands folded. Ethan leaned forward, trying to ride the wave of Linda's fake emotion. "Yeah, come on. You know how we are. We were just messing around yesterday. You always take things too seriously. It was just a joke. You are way too sensitive. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water. But in this room, blood was just a tool they used to wipe their feet on me. They were using the concept of family as a weapon. They wanted me to forgive the abuse simply because we share a last name. They wanted me to ignore the disrespect simply because we share parents." The fluorescent light buzzed above us. I looked at the tears rolling down Linda's cheeks. I processed them the same way I would process a hostile interrogation tactic. Calculated. Fake. Designed to force a surrender. "You did not joke," I said. My voice was completely flat. "And you are not sorry." Linda gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "How can you say that we are your family? You did it on purpose." I continued, cutting straight through her theatrical display. "You saw the scar that paid for our father to have a working heart, and you used it to make yourselves feel bigger. You used my military service as a punchline because your own lives are completely hollow." Ethan stiffened. He pointed a finger at me. "That is not fair. You do not know anything about my job." "I know you cowered like a beaten dog when Commander Moore spoke to you," I said. Ethan shut his mouth instantly. He swallowed hard. The truth hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He shrank back into his plastic chair. I turned my eyes back to Linda. She was still holding the tissue, but the sobbing had stopped abruptly. The mask was slipping off her face. "Ignorance is never a shield for cruelty, Linda," I said. "Do not sit there and pretend you were trying to help me find a husband. You wanted to humiliate me because you cannot stand the fact that I do not need your approval to exist." The air in the room went dead. For the first time in their lives, they had absolutely nothing to say. There was no audience here to take their side. There was no expensive wine to hide behind. I placed my hands flat on the plastic table. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I looked down at the two of them. They looked pathetic. I did not ask for an apology. An apology from a liar is just another lie. "Listen to me very carefully," I said. I projected my voice from my chest. It was a direct order. From this second forward, I do not care if you understand my job. I do not care if you understand why I wear the uniform. But you are absolutely required to respect it. Linda stared up at me, her mouth slightly open in shock. If you ever make one more sarcastic comment about my career, my rank, or my physical appearance, I said, pausing to let the weight of the words crush the oxygen out of the room. My chair at the family dinner table will remain empty forever. I will cut you out of my life, and I will never look back. Do you understand me? Ethan nodded slowly. He looked terrified. Linda could not even nod. She just stared at the cold concrete floor. I did not wait for a verbal confirmation. The terms were set. The perimeter was secured. I turned around and walked out of room 3. I pulled the heavy metal door shut behind me. The steel latch engaged with a loud echoing clack that bounced down the empty hallway. That sharp metallic sound hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then it shifted. The echo hardened. It transformed into the rhythmic driving crack, crack, crack of steel-capped dress shoes striking a polished hardwood floor. 3 months later. Crack, crack, crack. The echo of that heavy steel door bled perfectly into the rhythmic driving sound of steel-capped dress shoes striking polished hardwood. 3 months later. The auditorium at the Air Force Base was massive. It smelled of industrial floor wax, brass polish, and heavy wool. 300 officers stood at strict attention. A sea of service-dress blues. Total, absolute silence. You could hear a single breath echo off the high, vaulted ceiling. This was not a country club. This was not a backyard patio with a Weber grill. This was a fortress of discipline. I stood center stage. I did not look for my family in the crowd. I did not have to. I could feel them. Way in the back, sitting in the very last row, was Linda. The designer dresses and the oversized wine glasses were gone. She wore a plain, flat black dress. She sat perfectly still, her hands gripped tightly in her lap. She looked incredibly small. The sheer, crushing weight of military authority had swallowed her whole. In her suburban cul-de-sac, she was a queen. In this room surrounded by men and women who carried the actual weight of the world, she was a ghost. Her fake empire did not exist here. The base commander stepped forward. A 2-star general with a chest full of ribbons that told stories of real blood and real sand. Next to him was my father. Dad looked frail. His hands shook. He stepped up to me. He held the small, heavy silver pin. The silver oak leaf. 05, Lieutenant Colonel. He pressed the cold metal through the fabric of my lapel. He secured the backing. He knew exactly what brought the heart beating inside his chest. He knew it was the hazard pay of the woman standing in front of him. He stepped back. He did not say a word. He just lowered his head. Attention to orders. The adjutant barked over the PA system. The applause hit like a physical shockwave. A thunderous, deafening roar from 300 pairs of hands. I looked out over the crowd. In the third row, Raymond stood tall in his civilian suit. He gave me a single, sharp nod. Respect. The ceremony ended. The formation broke. The crowd began to mill out into the wide sunlit corridors of the base headquarters. I walked down the long hallway, the new silver weight sitting heavy on my shoulders. A figure stepped out from the shadow of a concrete pillar blocking my path. I stopped. I looked at him. It was Ethan. But it wasn't the corporate hotshot from the barbecue. The tailored Italian suit was gone. The $300 haircut was gone. His head was shaved down to the scalp, a raw, pale buzz cut. He wore a cheap, thin gray cotton t-shirt and faded jeans. He looked 10 pounds lighter. The arrogant smirk that always sat on his face had been completely wiped away. He looked hollowed out. A man who had looked in the mirror and finally realized there was absolutely nothing behind the glass. He didn't puff out his chest. He stood with his shoulders slumped. "Molly," he said. His voice cracked. I did not smile. I did not ask him how he liked the ceremony. I looked at him with the cold, calculating assessment of a field-grade officer. "Ethan." He swallowed hard. He looked down at my boots, then forced his eyes up to the silver oak leaves on my collar. "I quit the firm," Ethan said. The words hung in the air. "I walked into the recruiter's office on Tuesday." He continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I signed the papers. Air Force. I watched him. A 35-year-old man throwing away a six-figure salary, a luxury car, and a corner office. The midlife crisis of a coward who realized his entire life was a joke. Crank, I said, using the slang for a new recruit. What rank? E1, Ethan muttered. Airman Basic. The absolute undisputed bottom of the military food chain. He was going to be taking orders from kids barely out of high school. He was going to scrub toilets, run until he puked, and get screamed at until his throat bled. He was voluntarily throwing himself into the meat grinder. Why? I asked. One word. Flat and heavy. Ethan looked at my left arm, at the jagged, uneven tissue of the scar peeking out from under the cuff of my dress uniform. I need to know, he said, his voice shaking. I need to know what it actually takes. I need to know what that scar is really worth. Because what I have, what Linda has, it is fake, all of it. I did not feel a rush of pity. I did not feel the urge to hug him and welcome him back into the fold. The damage was already done. He had to pay his own toll now. I looked him dead in the eye. Prepare to eat dirt, airman. I stepped around him. I left him standing alone in the hallway, a broken man staring at the floor. Have you ever watched someone who talked down to you finally realize how worthless their own arrogance was? Drop a yes in the comments if you know the pure satisfaction of letting your success do all the talking. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe respect has to be earned, not demanded. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors leading out to the parking lot. The hot sun hit my face. I reached into the pocket of my dress pants for my keys. My fingers brushed against my phone. It was vibrating, a harsh, frantic buzzing against my leg. I pulled it out. I looked at the screen. The glaring sunlight made it hard to read for a second. Then the numbers came into focus. Area code 301. Bethesda, Maryland. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The buzzing stopped, replaced by a glaring red missed call notification. And then a voicemail icon popped up. An emergency code. The trap was springing shut again. I took Interstate 495 at 80 miles an hour. The celebration dinner was dead. The new silver oak leaves on my collar felt like lead. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center smelled like iodine, industrial floor wax, and panic. The emergency room was a war zone. I bypassed the civilian waiting area and found them outside the main trauma bay. My father sat in a cheap plastic chair. His hands rested on his knees, shaking uncontrollably. He stared at the scuffed linoleum, completely broken. Linda was in the middle of the hallway. She was sobbing loudly, her face buried in her hands. A nurse holding a tray of saline bags tried to get past her. Linda did not move. She just stood there, a roadblock of theatrical grief, sucking up the oxygen in a corridor meant for saving lives. I did not offer a hug. I did not ask if everyone was okay. I shifted into triage. I walked up, grabbed Linda by the elbow, and shoved her hard against the concrete wall. Move, I said. She gasped, her eyes wide, mascara running down her face. Molly? She is dying. Mom is. Shut your mouth and stay against the wall. I turned my back on her. The attending physician stepped out of the trauma doors. He looked exhausted. He saw the uniform. He saw the rank. He straightened his spine. Colonel, he said. Give me the sit rep, doctor, I ordered. My voice was flat, cold iron. Massive myocardial infarction. The Widowmaker, he said, skipping the bedside manner and giving me the tactical breakdown. We pushed clotbusters. She is unstable. We are moving her to the cardiac ICU. The next 48 hours are critical. Do it, I said. I want your best rotation on her floor. I looked back at my family. Dad was still staring at the floor. Linda was clutching her designer purse like a shield, trembling against the wall. Useless. In a crisis, the fake empire burns down and the cowards freeze. 2 days, 48 hours inside a windowless room on the 4th floor. The cardiac monitor beeped, a high, sharp, relentless screech. Beep, beep, beep. It drilled directly into my skull. The room smelled like rubbing alcohol and stale breath. I sat in a hard vinyl chair next to the bed. I had not slept. I had not taken off my uniform. The sharp creases were gone. The heavy wool fabric was stiff with dried sweat. I watched the jagged green line on the monitor. Linda did not sit in the room. She could not handle the reality of it. The plastic tubes taped down our mother's throat. The smell of sickness. Linda stayed out in the hallway. She acted as the courier. She bought overpriced coffee from the cafeteria and handed it to me through the cracked door. She slipped into the room on the second night. The overhead lights were dimmed. The ventilators hummed. She stood near the door, keeping her distance from the bed. She looked at me sitting in the dark. "You are so strong, Molly," Linda whispered. Her voice was thin, shaky. "You just know exactly what to do." I look at those machines and I feel like I'm going to pass out. I did not look at her. I watched the green line. "You were born to be a commander," Linda continued. She took a step closer. Her voice dripped with a sickly, desperate sweetness. "Mom needs you right now. Dad is a mess. I cannot handle this. You have to take the lead. You are the only one who can keep this family together." It sounded like a compliment. It was a trap. She was not praising my strength. She was weaponizing it. She was using my discipline as an excuse to completely abandon her own responsibility. She wanted to dump the heavy lifting, the late nights, and the crushing weight of our parents' mortality squarely onto my shoulders. Just like the hospital bills 5 years ago, I am the soldier. I take the bullets. She gets to go back to her manicured lawn and her red wine. "Get out of the room, Linda," I said softly. She flinched. She backed out into the hallway and closed the door. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I rubbed my eyes. The skin underneath was bruised purple from exhaustion. Mom was stabilizing. The doctor said she would survive. But she would need months of care, rehabilitation, constant monitoring. Someone had to do it. Dad couldn't. Linda wouldn't. I felt the invisible leash tightening around my neck, the heavy suffocating chain of the bloodline. Bzzz! My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sound was muffled by my trousers. I pulled it out. The screen glared in the dark room. An encrypted email, Department of Defense. I tapped the screen. The text decoded. Official orders reassignment, position strategic planning joint chiefs. Location Colorado Springs, Kyo. It was the golden ticket, the direct stepping stone to an '06 full bird colonel rank. It was everything I had bled for in the sand. I scrolled to the bottom of the message. The bold red text burned my retinas. Require acknowledgement and acceptance within 12 hours. Failure to accept will result in immediate cancellation of orders. 12 hours. I looked at the glowing screen. I looked at the fragile gray-haired woman lying in the hospital bed, kept alive by wires and plastic tubes. The hospital room felt exactly like a concrete vault. The walls were closing in. The hallway of the 4th floor was a tomb. 3 o'clock in the morning. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting a sickly pale glare against the white walls. The air conditioning pumped a steady stream of freezing air through the ceiling vents. The cold sank right through my uniform trousers and into my bones. I sat on the hard linoleum floor. My back rested against the concrete wall outside the intensive care unit. I pulled my encrypted laptop from my tactical bag. I rested it on my knees. The screen flared to life, throwing a harsh blue light across my face. I opened the email from the Pentagon. Location: Colorado Springs. Strategic planning. '06 track. I stared at the words. A full bird colonel. The Pentagon. It was the summit. The exact peak I had spent 2 decades climbing over broken glass and shrapnel to reach. I moved the cursor to the reply box. I raised my hands to the keyboard. My fingers were shaking. The same left hand that had pried open a crushed Humvee door in a combat zone was now trembling over a plastic keyboard. The weight of the family bloodline was heavier than armor plating. I cannot go. The thought echoed in my head, toxic and suffocating. Mom is lying in that room connected to a machine. Linda is completely useless. Dad is falling apart. I cannot leave them. I have to hold the line here. I started to type. To the office of the Joint Chiefs. I respectfully request a deferment of my orders due to a critical family medical emergency. Every keystroke felt like driving a nail into my own coffin. The daughter duty. The ultimate trap. I was stepping right back into the role they built for me. The silent shock absorber. The workhorse who sacrifices everything so the golden child can keep her hands clean. I was about to murder my own career to change bedpans for people who treated my hazard pay like a slush fund. The phone on the floor next to me vibrated. A harsh, sharp electronic ring cut through the dead silence of the hallway. I looked at the screen. The caller ID glowed bright white. Colonel Evelyn Dana, my commanding officer. I hit the green button and put it on speaker. I did not have the energy to lift the phone to my ear. "Colonel," I said. My voice was hollow. Colonel Dana did not offer a warm greeting. She did not ask how my mother was doing. She did not ask if I had eaten today. "Lieutenant Colonel Grant," Dana said. Her voice crackled through the cheap speaker, dry and heavy as a sledgehammer. "Tell me you are not sitting in a hospital hallway right now drafting a letter to throw away 20 years of service for a lazy sister and a spineless father." I froze. The cursor blinked on the laptop screen. "How did you—" I started. "I know your file, Molly. And I know your family dynamic," Dana cut in. Her tone was absolute ice. "I got a ping from command that your orders are still pending. I know exactly what is running through your head right now. You think you are being the good daughter. You think you are doing the noble thing by staying." I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "She had a massive heart attack, Colonel. They cannot handle this without me." Wrong. The word hit me like a physical slap across the face. "Your mother survived the critical window. She is stable," Dana said. The static on the line popped. "They have money. They have insurance. They can hire a home nurse. You are a soldier, Grant. You are not a free medical aid." I stared at the blue screen. The words of my deferral letter blurred. "Do not lie to me, and do not lie to yourself," Dana said, her voice dropping lower, cutting right down to the bone. "You are not staying out of love. You are staying out of cowardice." My jaw locked. "Colonel?" "Shut up and listen," Dana commanded. The authority in her voice pinned me to the wall. "You are using their incompetence as a shield. You are using this hospital room to hide from the responsibility of true power. The Pentagon scares you more than your toxic sister does. It is easier to be a victim in your family than to be a commander in Colorado." Silence hung in the cold hallway. Her words operated like a surgical scalpel. They sliced right through the fake nobility. They stripped away the guilt. She laid the ugly raw truth out on the linoleum floor. "You earned that promotion in the sand, Molly," Dana said. "If you hit send on that deferral, you betray the uniform. You betray every soldier you pulled out of the fire. You betray the scar on your own arm. Do you understand me?" I looked down at my left wrist. The jagged ridges of the Black Eagle scar stood out in the blue light. "I understand, Colonel." "Good. Sign the paper, Colonel Grant." "Out." The line went dead. A flat, continuous dial tone hummed in the air. I did not cry. I did not sit and ponder. The fog of guilt was completely gone, burned away by the harsh light of discipline. I looked at the screen. The pathetic, cowardly words of the deferral letter stared back at me. I pressed the backspace key. I held it down. The letters vanished. The excuses disappeared. The obligation evaporated. My hands stopped shaking. The iron returned to my spine. I typed one word. "Accept." I attached my digital signature. I hit send. The confirmation flashed on the screen. The Pentagon had my answer. I reached into my tactical bag and pulled out a portable thermal printer. I plugged the cable into the side of the laptop. I opened the original orders file. I hit print. The machine whirred to life. It screeched quietly in the empty hallway, spitting out a single sheet of heavy white paper. The official Department of Defense seal sat at the top. The transfer orders. I closed the laptop. The blue light died. I stood up. My knees popped. I brushed the dust off the back of my uniform trousers. I grabbed the printed piece of paper. The ink was still warm. I turned toward the heavy wooden door of the intensive care unit, the place where Linda and my father were hiding. I reached out. I wrapped my hand around the cold metal handle. I pushed the door open. 8 o'clock in the morning. The pale morning light sliced through the cheap plastic blinds of the intensive care unit. It was not a warm light. It was gray, washing out the color of everything it touched. The room smelled of dried sweat, heavy rubbing alcohol, and fear. The steady hiss of the oxygen line sounded like a leaking tire. My father and Linda were slumped on the vinyl visitor sofa. Sleeping, their mouths hanging open. They looked ragged, weak. The fake suburban armor was completely gone, leaving nothing but two exhausted civilians who could not handle the reality of a crisis. My mother was awake. She lay flat on the hospital bed, her head propped up by a thin, stiff pillow. The ventilator tube was gone, replaced by a clear plastic oxygen mask strapped tight across her face. She watched me walk into the room. I did not tiptoe. My boots hit the linoleum floor with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. I had not slept. My uniform was stiff. I felt every jagged edge of the last 20 years pressing down on my shoulders, but my spine was completely straight. Linda jolted awake at the sound of my boots. She rubbed her face, smearing yesterday's expensive mascara under her eyes. My father blinked, staring at me through the fog of exhaustion. He looked like an old, defeated man. I walked straight to the small glass table in the center of the room. I held the official Department of Defense transfer orders. The red ink of the commanding seal stood out violently against the crisp white paper. I dropped it. Smack. The sharp sound of the paper hitting the glass echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. I transferred to Colorado Springs at the end of the week, I said. My voice was a flat line, zero emotion, zero room for negotiation. I report to the Pentagon Regional Command on Monday morning. My father's jaw dropped. He leaned forward, staring at the red seal on the paper. His breathing suddenly turned ragged and shallow. He gripped the edge of the sofa. Linda snapped out of her daze. The panic hit her eyes first. Right behind the panic came the desperate, clawing need to control the situation. The need to keep her comfortable life perfectly intact. She shot up from the sofa, smoothing down her wrinkled designer blouse. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Linda hissed. Her voice was shrill, desperate to keep the volume low, but failing. "Mom just survived a massive heart attack. She was almost dead 2 days ago. And you are going to pack up and leave. You are going to abandon this house." She stepped toward me, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Is your heart made of solid stone, Molly? We are your blood. You cannot just walk away when things get hard. Who is going to manage all of this?" There it was, the ultimate trap, the heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt they had used to smother me for 2 decades. The absolute entitlement of a family that demanded my sacrifice while spitting on my uniform. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defense. I reached into the inner pocket of my heavy wool jacket. I pulled out a thick manila folder, the patient care plan for the next 6 months. Pinned to the front of that folder was a single piece of paper, a bank wire receipt from 5 years ago. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I invaded her personal space. I shoved the folder hard against Linda's chest. She gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to grab the heavy paper before it fell to the floor. "Look at the receipt, Linda," I ordered. The tone was absolute command. She looked down. Her eyes scanned the bold black ink, the date, the $50,000 amount, and the name of the anonymous trust lawyer in Washington, D.C. "I paid his hospital bill 5 years ago," I said. My voice was low, carrying the weight of a military judge delivering a death sentence. "I paid the debt for this house. I paid it with the blood I left in the sand in Afghanistan. You never found a charity. You never saved him." Linda froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The paper shook violently in her hands. The blood drained completely from her face. "I bought his life with my hazard pay while you refused to put a lien on your precious Porsche," I said. I stepped even closer, forcing her to look up into my eyes. "I played the invisible bank for 5 years so you could play the hero at the family barbecue." I looked over at my father. He was staring at the floor. His face was flushed dark red. His chest he heaved with short, panicky breaths. He knew. The ultimate shame of a man realizing his favorite perfect child did absolutely nothing, while the daughter he threw away paid for his heartbeat. The debt is paid, I said, my voice echoing off the sterile walls. The account is empty. I am done. I pointed at the thick care folder in Linda's shaking hands. That is the rehabilitation schedule, the medication list, the physical therapy contacts. You are going to manage every single appointment. You are going to pay the copays. Now it is your turn to be a useful daughter, Linda. Linda could not speak. The golden child illusion was completely shattered, pulverized under the weight of a single piece of paper. She stood there holding the folder like an explosive device that had just detonated in her hands. She had nowhere to hide. I turned away from her. I looked at the hospital bed. My mother was watching me through the clear plastic of the oxygen mask. Her eyes were exhausted, deeply tired, but they were clear. She had heard every single word. She looked at the thick, jagged scar on my left arm. Then she looked at the silver oak leaves shining on my collar. She understood the price I had paid. She finally understood that if I stayed, they would bleed me dry, until there was nothing left but an empty uniform. She closed her eyes. She gave a slow, single nod. It was a bitter surrender. The final release of a hostage. The handover was complete. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. I did not look back at the broken man on the sofa or the paralyzed woman holding the folder. Dinner is at 7 tomorrow night, I said to the empty hallway as I pushed the heavy wooden door open. Do not be late. The steakhouse on Route 9 was empty. Just a couple of truckers in the corner booth and a waitress who looked like she had been on her feet for 12 hours. It smelled like charred meat, old fryer grease, and cheap draft beer. We sat at a long wooden table in the back. There were no crystal wine glasses, no expensive bottles of imported red, just thick plastic cups filled with ice water and diet soda. I sat at the head of the table. My back was perfectly straight against the hard wooden chair. I cut my steak. The serrated knife scraped against the heavy ceramic plate. Screech, nobody spoke. The silence was absolute. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a family enjoying a meal. It was the suffocating, terrified silence of a defeated enemy sitting across from the occupying force. My father stared at his plate. He hadn't said more than 2 words since the hospital. The shame had aged him 10 years. Linda sat next to him. The arrogant, loud-mouthed suburban queen was completely gone. She kept her eyes glued to her mashed potatoes. Every time I moved my left arm, she flinched and looked away. She was terrified of the scar, terrified of the reality that she was now entirely responsible for the mess she had always ignored. My mother sat quietly recovering, leaning heavily against the backrest. She watched me. There was no warm, glowing maternal pride in her eyes, only a deep, exhausted realization. She knew the golden child was a fraud, and the scapegoat had just bought her own freedom with cash and blood. Then there was Ethan. He sat across from me. He was on a 4-day pass from Lackland Air Force Base. The transformation was brutal. The tailored Italian suits and the expensive haircuts were gone. His head was shaved down to the pale scalp. His skin was baked dark brown from marching under the Texas sun. He had lost 15 pounds. The cheap, stiff fabric of his service dress uniform hung loosely on his frame. He didn't have the arrogant smirk anymore. His eyes were constantly scanning the room, locked in that paranoid, hyper-aware state of a brand-new recruit who expected a drill instructor to start screaming at any second. Ethan picked up his plastic cup of ice water. He stood up. He stood at the position of attention, shoulders pinned back, chest out. He held the plastic cup out toward me. "Safe travels, Lieutenant Colonel," Ethan said. His voice was hoarse from screaming cadences. He did not call me Molly. He did not call me his sister. He called me by my rank. He acknowledged the chain of command. The blood hierarchy of the family was officially dead, crushed under the weight of a silver oak leaf. I picked up my cup. I met his eyes. "Keep your head down, airman," I said. I took a drink. I set the cup down. My mother slowly raised her glass of water, a silent, shaking salute, a final concession. I looked around the table. I searched my chest for something: anger, resentment, hate, even a tiny spark of familial love. There was nothing. Just an empty, quiet room in my head. The accounts were settled. I had paid for my father's heart. I had paid for my mother's survival. I had paid the toll for every single insult and every single joke. They had nothing left to take from me, and I had absolutely nothing left to give them. I wiped my mouth with a cheap paper napkin. I folded it into a perfect tight square and set it next to my plate. I stood up. I reached into my pocket, pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills, and dropped them onto the center of the wooden table. "Dinner is covered," I said. I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back to see if they were watching. The night air was freezing. Interstate 70 stretched out in front of me, a long black ribbon cutting straight through the darkness. The headlights of my truck carved a path through the heavy ash-colored night. I hit the on-ramp. I pressed my heavy boot down on the gas pedal. The V8 engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that shook the floorboards. I reached over and hit the button to roll down the driver's side window. The cold wind violently whipped into the cab. It stung my face. It smelled like pine trees, diesel exhaust, and cold asphalt. It smelled like distance. I rested my left arm on the open window frame. I didn't pull my sleeve down. I didn't hide it. The pale moonlight cut through the darkness, washing over my left forearm. It illuminated the thick, jagged ridges of the Black Eagle scar, the burn marks, the mangled tissue. It was not ugly. It was not a deformity. It was the exact price of admission to a life I owned completely. It was a heavy brass coin paid in full. It was a medal of absolute, undeniable freedom. I gripped the steering wheel tight. I stared down the endless black highway. Colorado was waiting. I pushed the pedal to the floor. The engine screamed, and the darkness swallowed the truck whole. If you love this story of taking back your power, hit the like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.